one-on-one presentation. We're very excited to welcome you to our webinar today. So just a quick note that today's webinar will be recorded and it will be shared with registered participants. We want to thank you all again for joining us live and coming prepared with questions. I'm super excited for what we have in store for you all today. I wanted to just take a minute to really introduce myself and so you know who's speaking in front of you. My name is Tyler Janae, and I'm the Outreach and Events Coordinator for the USA Gap Year Fairs and Go Overseas programs. I really fell in love with travel and adventure after studying abroad in Costa Rica. And then I went on to earn my Teaching English as a Foreign Language Certificate in Cape Town, South Africa. After that, I went on to teach English and American culture with high school students in Spain. So needless to say, international education and meaningful experiences are something I'm very passionate about. And I'm thrilled more than anything to be here today to help you achieve the gap year adventure of your dreams. Throughout the course of this webinar, we will start off the event with a gap year one-on-one given by our gap year counselor extraordinaire, Marion Taylor. But before we do, I'll share a few important resources and share a little bit more about Go Overseas. So this event is hosted by Go Overseas, which you can think of as Yelp, but for meaningful travel experiences. On Go Overseas, you can browse programs, read verified alumni reviews, and explore other resources such as articles, guides, and even scholarships. So if you're inspired today to take the leap and to start planning your gap year, this is a great place for you to do your research and find your best fit program. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat our homepage so you can take advantage of that as a resource. Speaking of a few other resources, these are ones that we really hope that you take advantage of right away. So the first one is if you're interested in learning more about our verified program providers and maybe even getting the chance to talk to them one-on-one, you can register for our last virtual gap year fair of the year, which is taking place on April 6th. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat for you all if you want to take advantage and register for our last National USA Gap Year Fair. And it is on April 6th, so that is coming up. Second is our survey. So definitely pay attention here as this is a fun one. Here at USA Gap Year Fairs, we're always looking to improve our content and make gap year information as accessible as possible. So with that being the case, we'd love to hear about your experience today. And if you complete this quick survey, which I'm about to drop in the chat, we would love to hear about your experience during today's webinar. And you'll be entered for a chance to win $250. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat as well. Lastly is one of my more favorite tools, which is the GapMatcher tool. I'm really excited about this one. So I personally think this is the coolest thing, and it's such a great resource for today. So our GapMatcher is our official USA Gap Year Fair search tool designed to generate a list of personalized gap year program suggestions based off of you. So if you still aren't quite sure which programs that you'll be interested in checking out, I invite you to take the GapMatcher as soon as we get off of today's webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the GapMatcher in the chat for you today. I do have some really, really exciting news that I would like to announce here today. Go Overseas and USA Gap Year Fairs is excited to announce that we will be giving away $5,000 in gap year funding this year. It takes less than 2 minutes to start your application. And so I'm going to highly encourage all of you who meet the eligibility criteria that is listed here on the screen to go ahead and start your application as soon as possible. You're only 3 steps away from winning $5,000. The deadline to complete that scholarship is coming up very soon on April 15th. So make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity. When I studied abroad, I was able to get the Gilman International Scholarship, and it really helped to offset a lot of the costs for these kinds of programs. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to the scholarship in there again, just for my friends who might have got here a little bit later. So with that being said, I'm finally going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Marion Taylor, who you all have been so patiently waiting for, our wonderful gap year counselor. So she is an accredited gap year advisor. She's the co-chair of the Gap Year Association Membership Committee, and she's also on the annual conference planning committee. She's the recipient of the 2021 Gap Year Association Advancing the Gap Year Movement Award, and she's based in Boulder, Colorado. She loves working with students in Colorado and all over the country. Before Marion dives into it, I just want to remind everyone of that Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to submit questions as you think of them, and we'll answer them at the end of the event. Without further ado, Marion, please take it away.
Thank you, Tyler, for that introduction, and welcome all of you from the Midwest and as far east as Maine. I just love having everybody from all over the country join us to learn more about gap years in general. So this is a pretty basic informational webinar today. Like Tyler said, I am gap year accredited. So in 2018, I went through a rigorous evaluation through the Gap Year Association. Meaning that I had to kind of dot all my I's and cross all my T's in terms of having a really good sense of risk mitigation, what kind of programs are out there that are credible, reputable, safe, that type of thing. And I, prior to starting my business 11 years ago, I have worked in the field of social work for about 35 years, working with family, children, and women's programs. And then decided to do this because this was really what I felt really positive. I love working with students, especially between high school and college age. I work with students that are in college, had a lot of leave of absence college students during COVID, and then post-college as well. And I've even worked with some adults who are between jobs or ending retirement. But for today's purposes, we'll be really talking about a gap year or gap semester or gap time between high school graduation and the first year of college, if you go to college or VOTEC or an internship or work or whatever you choose to do. In addition to my social work background, I need to go back. I am a parent of 4 gap year children, 2 boys and 2 girls. They're all older now, but I bring a parental perspective. And I think that's important when you send your child off to Nepal and you won't hear from them for 60 days because they're in the wilderness program. I think that's important. And I myself took a gap year way back in 1974. I wanted to learn French, so I attended the University of Grenoble. And then I used my French when I served in the Peace Corps after college for 3 years in Senegal, West Africa. So my gap year really served as a foundation for later on. And then throughout the course of my adult life, I decided I needed to learn Spanish. So spent time in a language immersion program in Cuenca, Ecuador, as well as Antigua, Guatemala, and then have volunteered in Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and Nepal. So each time that I'm out there, I always try to vet gap programs that happen to be in that area or in that country. So I am seeing the students in person, in the field, the interaction with the program leaders, with their homestay families. And I think that really brings some insight that I can impart to all the families that I work with. Next. So today we're going to go over a little bit about kind of insights that we have gathered from both annual surveys, alumni surveys, as well as 5-year surveys. We just completed one in 2020. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the various reasons for taking a gap year, what are the benefits. I'm going to try to dispel some myths that are out there. Oftentimes parents talk and say, oh, my child will never go on to college. There's an example of one. We're going to talk a little bit about funding, how to make a gap year affordable, different ways to access grants or scholarships. The nitty gritty of about, okay, now what? I know that I want to defer from college or VOTEC or whatever that year is going to be. What do I do now? How do I go about it? And then I'm going to do a broad overview of the different types of opportunities, ranging from wilderness to language immersion to a cultural exchange. But the specifics and all the programs themselves you can find on Go Overseas or attend the fair on April 6th, which will have a small smattering of gap programs that you can visit in Zoom rooms. And then I'll wrap up by talking a little bit about how I have found that gap programs really serve as a kind of foundation, building blocks for later on as you go on in life. Next. So according to GYA, 84% of students found that they were much more motivated and recharged after they took a year for themselves, a gap year, or it could be even a semester. They went into college and did much better. In fact, Bob Claggett, who's a former board member of GYA, he conducted 2 studies, one at the University of North Carolina and one at Middlebury. And both showed data that students that had taken a gap year perform better over the course of their 4 years in terms of their grades, and they graduated in 4 years instead of 6, which is the national average. Also, we have found that 90% of students that have taken a gap year go on to college, and that after they've dabbled perhaps in an internship or work experience, they are much more satisfied with their career after college or after graduate school because they tested out the water, so to speak. And a really great piece of anecdotal data that we found is that students that have taken a gap year are much more inclined to get civically engaged and realize the importance of voting. So that was a pretty high statistic, 80%. Next. So this wonderful kind of diagram was created by the Gap Year Association, and which I think is the most important out of this is the purpose, the star in the middle. If you can, over the course of your gap time, combine all these different ingredients, that which you love, that which perhaps the world needs, where you might make an impact or a difference in a community, that which you can afford, you might do a work away or help X, or you might do an AmeriCorps program so that you can earn money towards the GAP program and or perhaps college the next year. And that which is something that you're good at. I always try to work and build on the strengths of the students that I work with. So it can be a combination of community service, maybe career exploration, perhaps paid work. And then a free radical is time set aside where a student can kind of perhaps add in something that might be much more independent, such as doing a road trip with a best friend, or perhaps traveling on their own, or perhaps living with a friend in Europe, working at a museum, something like that. So this is just a Venn diagram that kind of shows you what are the ingredients that are important for a gap year. Next. So what are the reasons? Those vary obviously per student. I don't think the reasons for any student are the same. Most all students, however, are pretty burned out by the time they get to senior year, especially if you've been super involved, whether it be gap year editor or perhaps in the drama club or on varsity sports, or perhaps you're working a job after school, or you're super involved in community service. So a gap time can really be the time where you set aside all those commitments, strip away all those obligations, and really have time to reflect and kind of be absorbed in the experience. You can journal, you can draw, you can sketch, but it's time for you and your growth. We found, I think this 9 hours was taken through from COVID, but teenagers were spending almost 9 hours per day using digital media. And our hope is that during gap time, you'll get away from that. Some GAP programs don't even allow you to have any electronic devices. And when I kind of polled them afterwards, they said it was really freeing. It was really liberating because no one had a phone, and they were really able to kind of have more one-on-one time and really kind of gain more from the experience and be present. We've also found that students that take a gap year really learn how to kind of overcome challenges. Things may not be easy. It may be that they're in a foreign country and they can't understand what the homestay family is saying, so they're having to learn a new language. Or perhaps they're on a wilderness course and they are on belay and they have to go over that cliff and rappel down, and they have sewing machine needles knees because they're so nervous. But once they overcome that challenge, the confidence that they gain is something that the GAP students build on throughout their life. So building that grit and the resilience is really a great benefit. It's also an opportunity, as Tyler was talking about, is seeing other cultures. If you are fortunate enough to go overseas, to see how the majority of the world lives, to really appreciate our standard of living here, but to appreciate other religions, other cultures, other mores. And if you can't get overseas, just to get outside your own community, to get outside your comfort zone a little bit and to open up your eyes. There's a great value in that. It can be a time to really reignite your passion for learning. I myself was super burned out. I'd worked really hard to get into college, and I just didn't have any gas left in the tank. So taking a gap year really reinvigorated me, and I was much more motivated when I got to college. It can also be a time where you can work and earn money to put towards college or vo-tech, whatever you decide to do. And it can also be an opportunity to kind of dip your toe in a work job internship where you think you might want to go into engineering. So you participate in a program that installs water filters down in the Amazon, the most basic of engineering. Or it might be, I had a student who shadowed for 4 months births down in Peru because she thought she wanted to go on to medical school. And she came away saying, I don't think I really want to do that. So she majored in business, but saved 8 years of medical school tuition. So it can be a time to really explore different career paths. Next. So what are the benefits? Certainly it's an opportunity to kind of be less of a passive learner and to become more proactive about learning. You may be in charge of this 7th grade Nepalese classroom where you have to prepare the lessons and teach in English. It's a time where you are on the cusp of being an adult, 17, 18, 19-year-old, and you can really take charge of your own learning. It might also be a time where you haven't done your laundry ever, or perhaps you don't know how to cook. Those can be great opportunities to learn how to do that. Or perhaps you lose your iPhone or your passport. How do you problem solve? And if you're with a structured program, you will probably have a program leader help you. But if you're traveling independently, then you'll have to resolve that yourself. And so that's a really good opportunity to learn some life skills. I'm also a big proponent of learning service, where at 17, 18, 19, you can go and observe and work alongside and volunteer shoulder to shoulder with local communities on a equal power base relationship, so that the community has invited you in to work with them on a project. And I always recommend that students stay a little bit longer because it makes more of an impact. And then also it's a time where you can really learn about yourself, gain self-awareness. We talked a little bit about that on the poll there, where you understand what your limitations are, what your boundaries are, what are your triggers, especially if you're in a group or if you're independent. And we have found that gap year students are much more productive in the workplace, that they oftentimes will show more initiative. They might volunteer to finish up that project over the weekend, or they might become real leaders. They are really good team players as well. And those are all really good values and assets that an employer will want to have. Also, in addition to self-awareness, self-confidence. At the end of the gap year, I love interviewing my clients. They just show so much growth and self-confidence. And I feel much more encouraged to send them off to college or vo-tech or whatever they're going to be doing, because they have much more confidence and independence and motivation in themselves. Also, a gap year can kind of open one's eyes about how culturally interdependent we are. And I think this is super important in terms of the sensitivity around other cultures, other mores, other religions. Certainly, how interdependent we are with the internet and banking. Just look at Ukraine with these sanctions. It also can be an opportunity where you may know more after your gap year what you want to study, whether it be a course you want to take that you never thought you'd take, anthropology or women's studies, because you thought you wanted to major in economics. Or it may be that you know what you want to major in or minor in. So it really point you in that direction. And it also is terrific for your resume. One of the options I offer as a service is to really transcribe the skills out of the gap year experiences, whether it be certifications or soft power skills, to transcribe those onto a resume, because they really distinguish the student when they're applying for internships or jobs, that they spoke Xhosa with 17 clicks of the tongue, or perhaps they spent a year in Eastern Europe living with a homestay and had to learn that language and had to cope by themselves. All those things are showing risk-taking and initiative. And that's something that I think an employer will want. And then lastly, moral courage to really stand up for what's right and what's wrong, to show empathy, leadership, and as we mentioned earlier, to become responsibly civically engaged, like voting, and trying to make a difference when you get back to this country. Next. So what are some common concerns? Oftentimes I hear, oh my goodness, if my child takes a gap year, they will never go on to college. They'll drop out. When in fact, as I said, 90% go on to college. They're worried that they'll forget how to study. I have found that except for perhaps engineering and math, students are good to go. They don't forget how to study. They're more reinvigorated. They're more recharged. So it will not set them back. In fact, I see it as an investment. So if a student is kind of wishy-washy, doesn't quite know what they want to study at college, not quite mature or ready, then oftentimes I see this as an investment where they are more likely to go after a gap year, knowing what they want to study and really take advantage of that education rather than switching majors or transferring and, ending up taking 6 years to graduate. I always have questions about, will my college of choice allow a deferment? We now have over 3,000 colleges that allow deferments. I think they see the value in a gap year student coming to the classroom, knowing themselves that much more, making much wiser academic and social decisions, and enriching the classrooms with their life experiences. Professors love that. So more and more colleges are on board. Where there might be some issue is with public state universities, especially the larger ones. The UC system in California oftentimes will not allow deferment. They'll ask you to reapply. The University of Washington, for example, does not either. But if you have received a merit scholarship, they will usually honor those, hold them and honor them. But if it is economic or financially need-based, then you'll have to reapply. And then I always encourage parents to, if they have used or saved up with the 529 savings funds, you can use those to pay for a GAP program if the GAP program is college accredited. So that is something worth looking at to help pay for a GAP program and really to talk to your financial advisor. And the last myth is that it's only for those affluent and wealthy. There are many, many ways to pay for a gap year. I work very hard to assess what the budget is for the student. Are they going to have to work for part of the year or part of the summer to help offset? But there are many programs that make it affordable. You've probably heard of AmeriCorps, Student Conservation Corps, City Year. If you volunteer with them for 10 months, you receive a $6,500 Siegel Education Award that is matched by over 250 colleges in the US. So that is one way to actually earn money. Other opportunities are worldwide organic farming, where you have to pay for your travel to get there, but once arrived, then you volunteer in exchange for your room and board. Cash is the same. You just pay for your travel, and then your volunteering is provided for, that pays for your room and board. Rotary Youth Exchange is a wonderful way to experience a 9-month homestay, usually in a high school, living with someone in the homestay of your age. Usually I always recommend start looking into that junior year because it's a very early application. And then you can work as an au pair in many, many countries. Workaway has job opportunities in the US as well as overseas, as well as does HelpX. And then the National Security Language Initiative is hosted by the State Department, and that is a 9-month internship in a country of a lesser spoken language. So those have typically been Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. So those are all opportunities where either, the 9-month internship or placement is paid for, and all you have to pay for is room and board, or you can actually earn money through AmeriCorps type programs. Next. So here's some creative funding ideas. There's a lot here. You're welcome to take a screenshot of this. I always recommend that students earn money, whether it be on both summers or setting aside time during their gap year. But I have found that if they earn money to put towards their gap experience, whether it be a structured gap program or an independent type experience, they're much more invested. I also recommend that they perhaps do some crowdfunding with GoFundMe or Project Travel or Indiegogo. I am helping a student right now. He's kind of drafting a letter because his graduation and birthday are around the same time, and he's going to send it out to his first grade teacher, his fourth grade soccer coach, his ninth grade art teacher, his whole personal network, and just request in lieu of a graduation present to put it towards his gap year. And then he's going to describe a little bit about what he's going to be doing his gap year, and those are very, very successful. Also, a piece of information for parents: if your child registers to volunteer, do community service through a American-based program, and they are registered 501c3, then you can request a tax deduction for the program itself as well as the travel, and that can be sizable. So that's worth noting as well. There's a great funding aid link that's on the Gap Year Association website. I won't go through all these, but they're listed here. Those are well worth looking at. Travel Access Project used to fund, I think, 10 $3,000 grants. They were suspended during COVID. I don't believe they're back on, but it's worth looking at just in case. We talked about 529 savings funds and FAFSA. My understanding is you have to be enrolled in college in order to be eligible for the Pell Grants. But if any of you are a little bit older, that is worth looking at. Next. Here's steps for planning. If you're here at this fair, at this webinar, congratulations. It's a great place to start to gather information, maybe to attend a fair if you have that opportunity. There's quite a few that are back east after today, all located in the East Coast. So if you can, register for those and attend. But at this point, if you are a senior, you probably, if you're going to college, already applied, those are in, and now you're in the waiting game and probably actually starting to hear. March, April is when you hear. This is the time to sit down with your parents and say, okay, I really want to take a gap year. You need to check and make sure that your college of choice allows a deferment. If so, check and see when their deadline is, usually around May 1. And if they require a narrative or a plan of some sort of what you're going to do on your gap year. Some colleges just say check here and see you in 2023. They just want to know so that you can give your place to someone who's on the wait list. So that's the reason they have a deadline. In addition, talk a little bit, this is what I do with my students. How are you going to map out your gap year? Are you going to use the summers and travel? Are you going to work? What are your goals for your gap year? It's really important to have intention, purpose. We don't want anyone sitting in the basement of their parents' house watching reruns of a movie. It's important, if you can, to get outside your community and to set some purposeful goals. And then to really be realistic about your budget. What can you afford? What can you earn? Who might match? Do you need to take out a grant or look for a scholarship? If you are feeling overwhelmed, if you Google gap year, it's overwhelming. But if you are really overwhelmed and need some guidance, then look into a gap year advisor. There are 8 of us that are accredited across the US, all across the US. I'm the only one between Chicago and California, but I work nationally with everyone. I'm the only person, I don't have any employee working for me. And I really try to customize and personalize my services. I treat the clients a lot like my own children, and I am very aware of safety. And then after you've requested deferment from your college and you've done some research about scholarships, how you're going to fund it, does the gap year provide college credit, then I always recommend that students talk to at least 2 alumni that have done that particular gap program. If working with me, I will provide my alumni, but you can always ask the gap program for 2 or 3 names, usually the same gender if possible, and recent, maybe pre-COVID, because that put a different twist on things. Look at their deadlines. Usually for the fall, their enrollment period is between March and June, I'd say. They're enrolling now. For the winter spring programs, usually around mid-October through early November. Look at different fundraising methods, like we talked about earlier. If you're traveling independently, be very aware of all the visa issues. Schengen, has a 90-day limit. You can stay in all those countries, but after 90 days, you need to get to a non-Schengen country if you're staying in Europe. And those, just Google it. There's some that are listed. Obviously, Britain is non-Schengen, but it's important to kind of be aware of that, as well as obviously all the vaccine requirements. And then if you are traveling independently, be aware of the budget cost. Try to find discount airlines. Can you use your mileage points for that? AAA. Be aware of kind of hostels. I work very closely with students to make sure they're in a safe area, especially if females, that type of thing. Travel insurance, health insurance, all those type of things. And then I always recommend looking at the State Department travel website. That's a really good resource. Next. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of all the different GAP opportunities that are out there. I mentioned earlier, volunteer and community service, working with programs. If you're not with a GAP program that is working with a community-based organization already on the ground, then I work very closely to vet the volunteer program on the ground and make sure it's really ethical and there's an equal partnership. I think that's really important. And I always recommend staying longer if possible. Just, I think it makes a real difference in terms of getting to know the locals. There's both domestic and international. I mentioned about the tax deduction, and I mentioned about the educational stipend that you can get through AmeriCorps City Year, those type of programs. Next. You can do a postgraduate year. Oftentimes students will want to do another year, kind of like a 13th year. So they may go to a boarding school and do an additional year to improve their grades or to improve their test scores. Or they may actually go train in a sport. Alpine skiers, I've had two that have gone to Burke Academy for an extra year to reduce their points before they go on to ski at college competitively. I had a girl who did a dance program. It was like a mini Alvin Ailey program down in New York City. I had a student who did a culinary program in Florence, Italy. I had someone else who wanted to learn the classical guitar and took private lessons during that gap time. So it's an opportunity to kind of do something that maybe you have a hobby in or an interest in, but haven't been able to really dive into it during high school because it's been so busy. It can be a chance to also work. My oldest son worked 3 different jobs. He did a rafting company in Moab. He taught snowboarding here locally in Colorado, and then he worked in a restaurant. But it can be a time where you can really kind of dip your toe in an area that you think you're interested in working. And you can do also paid positions, both domestically as well as internationally. And that's a great way to earn money. Next. It's a good time also if you want to travel. Oftentimes I have students that have done a structured GAP program in the fall, and then they find a couple friends and they might work for 2 or 3 months and they do a great trip traveling together. Or you can arrange to do like a language program where you do a homestay with a family. You might do language program in the morning and then you might volunteer in the afternoon. So it can be a combination. You can get your TEFL certification like Tyler did. That is about 120-hour online course, or you can do it in country. But that is a great tool to have in your toolkit if you are traveling and want to earn money to teach English as a second language. You can do community service, or you can just travel independently. But I always recommend that you plan and be prepared. It's pretty hard to arrive in the middle of the night coming off the train in a foreign country with a foreign language, trying to find a hostel. So it can be romanticized. And so I get down to the nitty gritty when I help students that are traveling independently. Next. Outdoor wilderness and adventure. This was super popular during COVID because students could pod up and they'd be out in the wilderness. There are all sorts of types of programs that range from really rugged and challenging. As you can see, here's one, they're rafting. I think they tipped over, not all of them tip over, but I always recommend that if you're doing this independently, that you really vet and look at the well-established, reliable, and safe programs. You can receive college credit. And, even though they can be very physically challenging, they can also be very emotionally challenging. You can get lots of certifications, whether it be your wilderness first responder or your PADI scuba diving. So that's a great opportunity to build out your resume and get some certifications also. Next. There's environmental and conservation programs, both domestically as well as internationally. They often have a rugged component, whether you're kind of tracking cheetah footprints in the savanna of Tanzania, or perhaps you're studying coral reef bleaching down off the Great Barrier Reef. There's just a wide array from animal husbandry to marine conservation to forestry. It's a great thing to do during your gap year. Next. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it's a time where you can do kind of different things. If it's a political, here comes a midterm election, you can work in politics on a political campaign. You might want to learn how to code. You can get involved in climate change or through social justice programs. Or perhaps you are a dancer and want to dive into any number of theater, film, architecture, art history. There's just lots and lots of kind of different type of programs as well as activities that you can do. Next. So to wrap up, I tie this together just because I feel like I have used my initial gap year way back to kind of build out my love for languages, learning both German, French, and Spanish. I think taking your languages, you can use them professionally. I had to pull those out when I was visiting my son in study abroad. We did a World War II history kind of trip, and we went to Berlin, so I had to bring out my German, and then we were in Normandy and I had to bring out my French. So you never know when you'll be needing those. But I think with this kind of intercultural society, a language is just invaluable. It can also be a time where you come away from your gap year and really know what you want to study or take a course in, either in undergrad or graduate school. It may even help set you up for what you want to do as a professional in your career and or perhaps as a volunteer. I myself work with African refugee women in Denver, helping them write resumes, doing some community health awareness. And I know that all stems from my time in Peace Corps. So it can impact your choices there as well. As we mentioned earlier, it's a time where you can really kind of figure out what's important to you. What are your core values? And I think oftentimes you'll be tested in your gap year and they become clearer and clearer and really prepare you well for as you navigate college and beyond. It's also opened your eyes in terms of kind of seeing that there's a bigger world out there, not just your own high school, your own community, the country and beyond, the global. Certainly now with all the problems that are going on in Ukraine, it just expands your worldview. And I think a lot of the clients all tell me that they are just going to be a lifelong learner, that they're always curious, and it really opened up their minds. Talked a little bit about moral leadership, how you are the next generation coming up, and really important that you are empathetic and culturally sensitive to become the next leaders, to really lead our country in a way that is decent and empathetic, I think, with the rest of the world. It's also a wonderful opportunity to build lifelong friends. That's always a side benefit that I forget to mention, but you will, draw on those friendships as you go on to college or VOTEC or whatever you do after your gap year. You will circle back to those friends time and time again because they've seen you at your most vulnerable and they've seen you at your best. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, a gap year can really be a time to build up resilience and grit. And I think that is something that we all know as adults, all these parents on this call, on this webinar, that as life throws you some curveballs later on, you're going to be drawing from that resilience time and time again to help you kind of navigate all that life's troubles and difficulties that throw at you. So I believe that's it. And I'm going to turn it back to Tyler. Oh, whoops, one last slide. You don't have to use it a gap year advisor. If you are feeling overwhelmed and you don't know the difference between all the different gap programs, then a gap year advisor can be really helpful in kind of explaining the nuances, the differences between them. And I work really hard to personalize the gap experience to whatever passions and interests the student has. So it's not one size fits all, but that really I get to know them based on a questionnaire, on meeting them if I can, whether that be Zoom or in person, and then really try to find activities or experiences or programs that really are the right fit for that student's personality. Also, I provide 11 years of experience in terms of safety and what are credible that I have vetted. And I am very helpful in helping design independent GAP programs with all sorts of important tips. And lastly, I don't think many other GAP advisors do this, but I believe in strongly helping transition students that are coming out of a gap year, whether it be post summer into the following fall when you're newly arrived at college or whatever you may do. Sometimes, not always, there's a disconnect because you may have seen some life issues, human trafficking, AIDS, global climate change. And then you get to college and you've got some younger, newer students that get there and are interested in binge drinking, and there's just this disconnect. And so I work really hard in helping students with that transition, and I think that's it. So if you have any questions, I think Janae is gonna Tyler's gonna field those questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Marion, for that informative presentation. So be sure to connect with Marion after this webinar. I went ahead and put her information in the chat. Taylor@thegap.com. We have her information to send her an email as well. So now we're going to get into the Q&A. This is your opportunity to ask some really good questions about the gap year experience, since we have our gap year extraordinaire here available for you. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to take a look at some of the questions that are in the Q&A. So it looks like we have a question related to, so for students who are a little bit nervous to leave home, what's some advice that you can give those students who want to take a gap year, but are just kind of nervous about taking that leap?
So I usually kind of try to see if they're comfortable staying domestically. So if going overseas is just too scary, too overwhelming, then I talk a little bit about staying closer to home. Is that within their own town? Is that within their own state? Is that within the United States? The silver lining that came out of COVID was that all of us GAP advisors work very closely with these GAP programs to create domestic GAP programs. And so I have a whole list ranging from boat building in Maine to marine conservation in Hawaii, from wilderness up in Alaska down to marine biology down in the Everglades in Florida. So there are so many US GAP options now. And so I would say, if you're comfortable to stay within the US, so you're close to home in some capacity, but if that even feels too overwhelming, then think about maybe community college. Maybe live at home, but take a course or two or three in an area of interest. It might be welding. I had someone that did a welding course before he went off. So that's a way to kind of dabble. There are college courses, but it's a community college, so you're not living on campus. That might be a way to do it. Or perhaps even just to volunteer. You can live at home, volunteer, work with refugees, or perhaps dabble in a hobby. Do that, or work just and live at home. So do that for a semester and gain your self-confidence. And then maybe, come January, see if you want to venture further out.
Thank you for the answer to that question. Our next question is from Tim. He wants to know if you know of any programs that would mentor someone while they start their own business. Mentorship.
So I know a few programs that actually are very geared towards social entrepreneurs. So I know mentorship is included in that. So I can think of 3 off the top of my head. There's one right here in Boulder. So yes, those very much exist. And I believe actually there's a big scholarship available in the Gap Year Association funding aid kind of link that offers, I think, scholarships for students that want to develop their own business. So yes, in answer to your question, there definitely are programs available for that.
Yeah, and I would also, just to add on, Tim, if this is for you or for a student, I would definitely take advantage of that GapMatcher tool. So it's kind of like gets you through the entire process, ask you what your interests are, ask you what kind of programs that you might be interested in. And then on our dashboard, you could totally kind of search up mentorship in some of those programs, and they might pop up and be available for you. So I would totally say take advantage of that GapMatcher tool. Our next question says, can you comment about doing an experience for a year versus piecing together different programs?
So I have to say, with COVID, that has tilted a little bit towards piecing experiences more together. That's almost what everybody does. Before COVID, there were about 3 or 4 9-month long programs. There's only, I think, maybe 2 that still exist that made it through COVID. I think it's great to do 9 months. I think you get a lot out of it. After you get around the holidays, and the group tends to get much more cohesive, much more comfortable, less homesick, and really kind of fly that last 2 or 3 months. However, students sometimes say to me, oh, I don't want to be with those same 12 people for 9 months. So they don't want to do that. They get nervous about that. And oftentimes I have found that students have so many interests. They want to do so many things during their gap year that by breaking it up and piecing it together can often be actually really beneficial. You can include both summers in your gap year. I just worked with a student today who wanted to do a structured gap program in the fall. He's not sure where, but he hasn't been away from home very much. He really wants a social cohort, which all of you high schoolers have been missing out on since COVID. He wants to be with his peers, create a community. And then he wants to go learn Japanese in Japan. And it's just an interest he has. But he's really clear about doing something very structured with an agenda, with a group. And there's some nuances between how structured they are to maybe perhaps less structured, less supervised, but still within a group. So people generally want to get a lot of things out of their gap year. They have a lot of goals. It may be learning a language. It may be doing a wilderness program. It may be traveling with a best friend. It may be working to earn money. So they may have all these different goals and intentions. And the only way we could probably even get half of them done is by being able to piece them all together. And then lastly, I follow up. Most students want to come home for the holidays. Whatever religion they are, I find that after the fall, they want to come back, in December and see their family and see their friends that have come back from college. That's a big kind of booster for them, is to reconnect and then set off again mid-January when they've all gone back. So they like having that piece. And so it's a good way to kind of break up the year. So that's just a kind of answer.
Awesome. This next question is geared more towards parents. So what would you say to a parent who has a student who they believe is not quite ready or not quite mature enough to go away and go to college yet, but would benefit from a gap year?
So am I trying to convince the student or the parent?
I think they want some advice on how to inspire the student to understand how important a gap year can be for them.
Okay. So ideally attend one of these webinars or a gap fair to hear, talk a little bit about the benefits as I presented today. I always recommend that if a parent knows of any child that has been, or a student that has been through a gap year, to have them talk to their own child, whether it be a cousin, it might be an older brother, it might be a teacher at their school. Talking to them to learn about what they felt about their gap year. Usually it's positive. I always think it's a great idea. I think looking at a website like Go Overseas, just looking at the possibilities, the opportunities gets me excited. You can type in anything, Nepal, you can teaching, it'll filter out. And I think just letting them explore, letting them surf that website is a great way to kind of get them excited about all the different options that are out there. And then, I think if you want, all of the gap year advisors offer an initial consultation free for 30 to 45 minutes. I'd be happy to speak to a student that is on the fence about, should I take a gap year? That is very easy. And I have to say, in my 11 years, I've never had a student regret it. So for me, that's an easy sell. And I'd be happy to talk to them. And I think all the other gap advisors would be too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Marion. Our last question is, so someone is asking, how hard is it to get college credit, or can you receive college credit through some of these gap year programs?
Yes, you can. Most of the gap programs say it right on their website. They are usually affiliated with a college, or the gap program is accredited by the Gap Year Association, and they help you get credit through Portland State University. I'm trying to think of one. Like ARC, I believe, is one gap program. You pay, I believe, ARC, and then through the Gap Year Association, they work through Portland State University that will assign you the different, essays or whatever is required, and you would get credit through Portland State University. But I will say that you need to be very careful. The college of your choice may or may not want you to get credit. My college was very clear, and I learned French fluently, and they didn't give me any French credit. So make sure before you spend the extra money for that college credit through the GAP program that you check with the college of your choice to make sure that they will accept those credits. Sometimes it's just a question of, oh, then you're coming in as a transfer, or you won't be in the freshman dorm, or that type of thing. So just be super careful. But there are a lot of GAP programs now that allow college credit through Western State or Portland State University. So there are a lot. It's more common than not these days.
Great point. Thanks so much, Marion. One more thing before we let everyone go for today is that we really just want to highlight this gap year scholarship. So we thank everyone for answering or asking those questions to Marion. Thank you, Marion, for this amazing presentation. You're making me want to take a gap year now. If you have any more questions for Marion, feel free to continue the conversation with her. Her information is in the chat. So just back to the scholarship, it opened on March 1st. It ends on April 15th. So I highly encourage anybody thinking about taking gap time, whether it be a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years, like this is your opportunity to earn that money that's going to help with your gap year experience. It takes all of 2 minutes to start your application, and the requirements are quite simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drop the scholarship link in the chat one more time for everyone to see. Dropping it in there for everyone. And then lastly, if you're interested in meeting some of our amazing providers during our next virtual USA Gap Year Fair on April 6th, you can register for that on this link that I'm dropping right now in the chat. I know one of the questions was related to how can I get my students to be excited about taking a gap year? And this is a really great opportunity because not only will they hear the webinar one-on-one, but they'll be able to chat with providers and ask those specific questions that are tailored to them. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have an amazing rest of your day.